are certain places in the world that seem to radiate evil, places where the air is thick with a sense of dread, and the shadows seem to take on a life of their own. The abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town was one of those places. It had been closed for years, but the rumors surrounding it never died. The rumors of strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. But that was nothing compared to what the group of college students who decided to explore the asylum would soon face. The group consisted of 5 friends: Sarah, Tom, Rachel, Chris, and Nick. They had heard the rumors about the asylum and were intrigued by the idea of exploring it. They arrived at the building just as the sun was setting, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. The asylum was a sprawling 3-story building, surrounded by a high fence topped with razor wire. The windows were boarded up and the doors were locked, but there were a few places where the fence had been cut and the group managed to squeeze through. They made their way inside, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The first thing they noticed was the smell. It was a sickly sweet odor that seemed to cling to the air. They couldn't place it, but it made their stomachs churn. The second thing they noticed was the sound. It was a low rumbling noise that seemed to come from deep within the building. It was hard to tell what it was, but it sounded like a voice, chanting in a language they didn't understand. As they explored the first floor, they found evidence of the building's sordid past. There were padded cells with rusted shackles, medical equipment that looked like it belonged in a torture chamber, and graffiti scrawled across the walls that read, "Abandon all hope," and "He is coming." They made their way to the second floor where the atmosphere became even more oppressive. The walls were covered in a black, slimy substance that seemed to pulse with a sickly glow. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet, and they could hear something scuttling in the darkness. That's when they saw it. A figure standing at the end of the hallway, silhouetted against the glow of the slime. It was tall, impossibly thin, with long, spindly arms that seemed to stretch on forever. Its face was obscured by a hood, but they could feel its gaze upon them. They froze, unsure what to do. That's when the figure started moving towards them, its gait unnatural, almost spider-like. They ran, the sound of its footsteps echoing behind them. They made their way to the 3rd floor, where they found themselves in a long, narrow hallway, with no other exits. The figure was getting closer, its footsteps growing louder with each passing moment. They huddled together, their hearts pounding in their chests as the figure came into view. It was then that they saw its face, or what passed for one. It was a writhing mass of tentacles, with a single glowing eye at the center. It seemed to smile at them, its lips curling up in a grotesque mockery of human emotion. It spoke, its voice a cacophony of sounds that seemed to come from every direction at once. "Welcome," it said, "to my domain. I am Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos, and I have been waiting for you." The next morning, the police arrived at the asylum to investigate reports of screaming and strange noises. What they found was a scene of unimaginable horror. The 5 friends were nowhere to be found. The only evidence of their presence was their abandoned backpacks and flashlights scattered across the floor. Police searched the entire building, but there was no sign of the missing students. It wasn't until a week later that a hiker stumbled upon a cave deep in the woods, miles away from the asylum. Inside the cave, he found the mutilated remains of 5 students. Their bodies were twisted and torn, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Police launched an investigation, but they could find no explanation for what had happened. The medical examiner's report said the cause of death was massive trauma and injuries consistent with a wild animal attack. But there were no known animals in the area capable of causing such damage. Rumors started to circulate about what had happened to the students in the asylum. Some said they had disturbed an ancient burial ground. Others said they had unwittingly summoned a demon. But the truth was far more terrifying. The students had stumbled upon an ancient ritual site where Nyarlathotep was worshipped by a cult of devotees. The crawling chaos had taken an interest in them and had lured them into the asylum, where he had tortured and killed them in a ritual sacrifice. The students' souls were now trapped in the afterlife, forever tormented by the horrors they had witnessed. And Nyarlathotep continued to lurk in the shadows, waiting for his next victims to stumble upon his domain. Years had passed since the tragedy at the abandoned asylum, but the memory of it still lingered in the minds of the townspeople. There were whispers of strange occurrences in the area, of inexplicable disappearances and sightings of a figure in the shadows. One night, a group of teenagers decided to explore the asylum, eager to uncover the truth behind the rumors. They crept through the dilapidated building, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. As they made their way through the corridors, they heard strange whispers and creaking noises. They brushed it off as their imagination, but their nerves were frayed, and they were on edge. Suddenly, one of the teenagers let out a blood-curdling scream. The others rushed to her side, only to find her staring at a wall, her face frozen in horror. "What's wrong?" they asked, but she couldn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on a strange symbol etched into the wall, a symbol they had never seen before. They tried to pull her away, but she was frozen in place. It was as if the symbol had cast some kind of spell on her, locking her in place. Other teens knew they had to leave the shelter ASAP, but as they turned to leave, they found the door had been sealed shut from the outside. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped in the asylum with no way out. As they searched for another exit, they came across a room that had been locked from the outside. They pushed and pulled on the door, but it wouldn't budge. That's when they heard footsteps from the other side. They froze in place, unsure of what to do. The footsteps grew louder, and the door finally swung open. Standing before them was a figure dressed in black robes, his face obscured by a hood. The teenagers backed away, fear etched on their faces. The figure beckoned them, and they knew they had no choice but to follow. He led them through winding corridors and up a flight of stairs, until they finally reached a small room at the top of the asylum. Inside the room, a circle was etched into the floor, and strange symbols scrawled on the walls. In the center of the circle, there was a small pedestal upon which rested a black stone. The figure pointed to the stone, and the teenagers knew what he wanted. With trembling hands, they each placed a hand on the stone and closed their eyes. Suddenly, they were transported to another realm, a world of darkness and terror. The crawling chaos stood before them, his eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. "You have been chosen," he said, his voice echoing through the darkness. "Chosen to serve me, to do my bidding." The teenagers tried to resist, but they were powerless against the will of Nyarlathotep. They were forced to do his bidding, to spread his influence throughout the world. And so, they became the crawling chaos's loyal disciples, spreading terror and destruction wherever they went. They were feared and reviled by all, and their names became synonymous with darkness and evil. But even as they served their master, a sense of unease gnawed at the back of their minds. They knew that their fate was sealed, and that they would never be free from the clutches of the crawling chaos. And so, they plotted and schemed, searching for a way to break free from Nyarlathotep's grip. They studied ancient texts and consulted with mystics and seers, until finally they found a way. They journeyed to the heart of the asylum, to the very place where they had first encountered the crawling chaos. There, they performed a ritual, calling upon the elder gods to aid them in their quest for freedom. They chanted ancient incantations and performed bizarre rituals, drawing upon the power of the stars and the dark energies that permeated the asylum. And finally, their efforts were rewarded. The very air around them crackled with energy as they felt the grip of Nyarlathotep begin to weaken. They could feel his power waning and knew that they had succeeded in their quest. But even as they celebrated their victory, they knew that the crawling chaos would not be defeated so easily. They had angered him, and he would not rest until he had reclaimed what was his. And they prepared for the final battle. They knew that they would face many trials and tribulations, and that the path ahead would be fraught with danger. But they were determined to see it through, for they knew that the fate of the world rested in their hands. As they journeyed deeper into the asylum, they encountered strange and terrifying creatures, each one more grotesque and malevolent than the last. They fought bravely, their minds and bodies stretched to the limits, until finally they came face to face with the crawling chaos himself. He towered above them, his eyes blazing with an otherworldly fire, his tentacles writhed and twisted, reaching out to ensnare them in their grasp. But the disciples were not afraid. They stood firm, their wills unbreakable, and faced the crawling chaos head-on. The battle was long and grueling, but in the end the disciples emerged victorious. They had defeated the crawling chaos, banishing him back to the realm from whence he came. But even as they celebrated their victory, they knew their fight was far from over, for they had angered another, far more powerful entity, one that had been awakened by their battles. Cthulhu, the great old one, had risen from his slumber, drawn by the chaos and destruction that had consumed the asylum. His eyes glowed with an otherworldly light as he surveyed the carnage that surrounded him. And he looked at his disciples. They could feel his power, a dark and malevolent force that threatened to engulf them. But even as they trembled with fear, they knew they could not give up. For they were the only ones who could stand against the great old one. They were the only ones who could save the world from his wrath. And so they prepared for the final battle, knowing that their victory would mean saving the world. They faced Cthulhu head-on, their weapons and magic a mere flicker of light against his towering form. But they were determined, and they fought with all their might, and in the end, their efforts were rewarded. Cthulhu fell before them, his form dissolving into a maelstrom of darkness and chaos, and in that moment, the disciples knew that they had saved the world from destruction. Despite their triumphs against Nyarlathotep and Cthulhu, the disciples could not escape the horrors that haunted them. They were forever marked by the madness and chaos that had consumed the asylum, and they could never truly return to their normal lives. One by one, they began to succumb to the darkness that had consumed them. Some disappeared without a trace, lost to the void. Others went mad, their minds shattered by the eldritch energies that had permeated the asylum. And still others simply could not live with the knowledge of what they had done. They had defeated the crawling chaos and the great old one, but at what cost? The world was forever changed, and they could never go back to the way things had been. In the end, only one student remained. She had seen her comrades fall, one by one, until she was the last one standing. But even as she celebrated her win, she knew it was hollow, for she was alone in a world that was forever changed. The horrors that she had faced had left their mark on her, and she knew that she could never truly escape them. And so, she walked away from the asylum, leaving behind the horrors that had consumed her. She walked until she reached the edge of the world, and then she kept walking until she disappeared into the darkness. And in the end, the world was left with nothing but the echoes of the madness and chaos that had consumed the asylum. The disciples were forgotten, their names lost to time. And the world kept turning, oblivious to the horrors that lurked in the shadows. For in the end, the disciples had saved the world, but at the cost of their own souls. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but they could never truly escape it. And so, they were forever doomed to be haunted by the nightmares that they had faced until the end of time. As I step through the rusty iron gates of the Eastwood Mental Hospital, a shiver runs down my spine. The once grand institution now stands as a dilapidated shell, looming ominously against the moonlit sky. The air is heavy with the weight of forgotten memories and the whispered secrets of tortured souls. I am not alone in this venture. 3 brave friends of mine named Sarah, Josh, and Derek accompany me, their hearts pounding with a mix of trepidation and excitement. Armed with their cameras, we intended to capture the paranormal activity that is said to haunt these decaying halls. We wanted to create a YouTube video that will both entertain and terrify their audience. The legends surrounding Eastwood Mental Hospital are ripe with tales of restless spirits, tortured souls who never found solace in life or death. As we enter the echoing corridors, a sense of unease washes over me. The dim flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper, revealing glimpses of a forgotten past. The air is stagnant, tainted by the smell of decay and abandonment. Each creaking floorboard seems to echo through the hollow halls, as if the building itself is alive with anticipation. Sarah, the fearless leader of the group, guides you deeper into the bowels of the asylum. She tries to hide her nerves behind a confident smile, her voice cracking slightly as she points out places of interest. Josh, the group's skeptic, makes sarcastic remarks, attempting to lighten the mood. Derek, the camera operator, diligently captures every moment, his lens becoming the eyes of their future audience. Hours pass as we explore the labyrinthine corridors, each room revealing more disturbing remnants of the hospital's past. I had stumbled upon crumbling patient records, old medical equipment, and even remnants of restraints used to confine the mentally ill. The oppressive atmosphere becomes suffocating, but the anticipation of discovering something truly supernatural keeps me going. However, as the night grows darker, an unexplainable chill fills the air. Whispers begin to echo through the halls, carrying the tortured murmurs of long-forgotten souls. Our nerves started to fray. Our laughter had been replaced with anxious glances. Shadows dance in the corners of our vision, flickering in and out of existence like phantoms. In the heart of the asylum, a room hidden away from prying eyes, I'd stumbled upon a collection of photographs. The images depict the patients in various states of anguish, their eyes hollow and despair etched onto their faces. One picture in particular catches my attention, the figure of a tall, gaunt man with wild, unkempt hair, his eyes burning with madness. It sent a chill down my spine, as if his gaze followed my every move. Suddenly, a door slams shut behind me, the sound reverberating through the empty hallways. Panic sets in as we trace back, searching for an exit. But the asylum seems to change before our eyes, twisting into a nightmarish maze. The walls morph, the ceiling lowers, and the very air becomes dense and suffocating. Whispers grow louder, the tormented voices overlapping into an incoherent symphony of anguish. Shadows solidify into grotesque forms, manifesting as the restless spirits that haunt this forsaken place. The ghosts of the mentally insane, driven to madness in life, now seek vengeance upon the living. Me, Sarah, Josh, and Derek run, our screams lost amidst the cacophony of spectral wails. But no matter where we turned, we found ourselves trapped in this macabre nightmare. We decided to split up and look for an exit in teams of two, as me and Derek frantically sprint through the twisting corridors of the Eastwood Mental Hospital. The screams of Sarah and Josh echo behind us. Fear grips my heart, urging me to move faster, to escape the clutches of the vengeful spirits. The air grows thicker, charged with an otherworldly energy. The wails of tormented souls grow louder, filling the space around us. Derek's breath comes in ragged gasps beside me, matching the rhythm of my pounding heart. Suddenly, we catch a glimpse of light up ahead, a faint glimmer promising an exit from this nightmarish labyrinth. Adrenaline courses through my veins, pushing us forward as if guided by an unseen force. Me and Derek push through the final doorway, stumbling out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. Relief washes over me as you realize we escaped the clutches of the spirits. The weight of the asylum fades behind me, replaced by the comfort of freedom. But a bittersweet sorrow tugs at my heart as you remember Sarah and Josh, left behind to face the wrath of the vengeful souls. Me and Derek stand outside the asylum, the reality of what just transpired sinking in. I exchange a silent, solemn look, understanding the sacrifice made by your friends. Their bravery and curiosity ultimately led to their tragic demise. In the aftermath, me and Derek decide to honor the memory of Sarah and Josh. I vow to share their story, not as a sensationalized YouTube video, but as a cautionary tale. I want the world to know the dangers of delving into the supernatural without proper preparation and respect. With heavy hearts, I gather the footage recorded by Derek's camera, carefully piecing together a documentary that pays tribute to our lost friends. It serves as a reminder of the paranormal forces that lurk in the shadows and the devastating consequences that can accompany such investigations. As the documentary gains attention, its purpose becomes clear: to raise awareness about the haunted history of the Eastwood Mental Hospital and the spirits that continue to roam its forsaken halls. Me and Derek channel your grief into a mission of education and reverence, ensuring that Sarah and Josh's sacrifice is never forgotten. The spirits of the mentally insane still haunt the abandoned asylum, their presence a chilling reminder of the price paid for curiosity. And while me and Derek manage to escape with our lives, the weight of their loss forever imprints upon our souls, a constant reminder of the darkness that dwells within the realm of the paranormal. This was back in like November 2017, and me and my roommate had just graduated from college. We both wanted to take a little break to clear our heads before we started the ominous post-grad job search. We lived in the south at the time and didn't want to travel super far, so we decided to get an Airbnb out in the wilderness somewhere semi-local. We also didn't have much money, but that wasn't going to stop us. We'd find a cheap place out in the woods and spend some time in nature to clear our heads. We ended up landing on a place in Gardendale, Arkansas, super small town in kind of a forested valley, just the kind of place we were looking for. We booked a cabin on the mountainside for a week and couldn't wait to escape our dread of adulthood. In case you've never driven through Arkansas, it's filled with small towns that come up out of nowhere as you weave through the hilly, mountainous roads. I wouldn't call them creep or anything. I'm sure pleasant people live there, but the state I'm from is very flat, so it's odd to think about living on a mountain surrounded by the wild. And if you wanted to leave, there's no quick way to do it. It's a mountain after all, so you got to take the winding roads all the way down. The drive was very long, and we made it to the cabin with about half an hour of daylight left. We got all the stuff out of his hatchback and tossed it into the cabin. The first night we were beat and pretty much went straight to bed after a quick shower. The cabin was pretty small, but not cramped with just us two. It was 3 bedrooms, but one of them the owner just used for storage. My room was through the living room and then left just before the kitchen, and then my friend's room was through the kitchen, and it looked like the room had been added on later because the attic didn't extend above it. Across the hall from my room was the bathroom, and to the left of that was the storage room. I have to admit it was a little unsettling, having this unoccupied room right next to mine, and an attic that seemed to constantly have rodents running around in it above me. However, brave soul that I am, I endured these things and managed to sleep soundly the first few nights. For the first few days, we mostly stayed close to the cabin. We cooked and kept the fire pit lit outside and made an ungodly amount of s'mores. I brought my camera and took some pictures of the sun coming over the hilltops around us. On the 3rd day, I went on a solo hike. My friend wasn't really into the active stuff. He's a tall guy and a little squishy around the abs, if you know what I mean. I've always been pretty fit, although shorter guys tend to be like that. For the record, I'm 5'7". Anyway, back to the story. On this hike, I went up the side of the hills surrounding the valley our cabin was in. It was a pretty short trail. I imagine hunters used it. After about 4 miles of winding dirt trail, I reached the summit of the valley. The view was spectacular, honestly. I finished in the late afternoon, and the golden rays of sunlight lighting the valley below was breathtaking. The trail was really easy to follow, so I decided to poke around down the other side of the valley for a bit, just out of curiosity. I was no longer on the trail, but I left my flashlight on at the end of the trail, just to be sure I didn't get lost. Service was abysmal there, so calling someone to come find you was pretty much out of the question. After about 20 minutes of poking around, I saw a building just 100 yards or so down the other side of the hill. It was pretty large and looked like a prison or something that had been out of use for a long time. My urge to explore it wasn't quite as strong as my urge to not die in the forest, so I decided to leave it and come back with my friend to check it out. I got back to the trail end and decided to leave my flashlight there, so I knew we found the right spot when we came back. I turned it off and placed it against a dead tree so it would be easier to find. By the time I got back to the cabin, it was dark out. My friend had been worried that I had gotten lost, but I explained that. I found this broken down building and we should go snoop around once the sun came up. Rightly, he decided that was a Moroniki deer and we would not be doing that. He not so eloquently explained to me that it was a fucking stupid thing to do, and if we died out here, people would make shitty YouTube videos about our disappearance. Ultimately, agreeing with him, I resolved to eat some fire-cooked hot dogs and chili that he had been preparing, and then we watched some old Planet Earth episodes that were on DVD before heading to bed. I was pretty tired after hiking around all day and ready to get some sleep. The bedrooms didn't have TVs or anything, so the cabin was very dark once we both were ready for bed. We kept the kitchen light on, just to be able to make our way to the bathroom during the night, just in case. So, as you can imagine, I was very surprised to see a light out of the window in my bedroom. It was pretty far away and flickering like it was being kicked around. Then I realized it was my flashlight. An animal must have grabbed it and somehow turned it on and was now knocking it around, causing beams of light to fall down the valley. I watched it for a bit, slightly annoyed by the fact that I probably wouldn't be getting my flashlight back. Then, the light stopped moving so frantically. It stopped. Pointed directly at our cabin and seemingly directly at my window, the light stayed still. My heart was beating fast now, and all kinds of images flew through my head about someone on the mountain using my flashlight to hunt us down. Then my senses came to me. Whatever was messing with the light before just got bored and left it there. So now it was going to shine right into my bedroom all night. I got up to go to sleep in the living room to avoid the light, and then suddenly, just as I stood up, the flashlight turned off. As you can imagine, I'm feeling great at this point. I decided no to wake up my friend after 10 minutes of looking out the peephole of the front door. The light never came back on, and I felt like waking him up in my manic state would just make things worse. I managed to get a few hours of sleep, but as you can imagine, I was constantly waking up at the slightest noise. Spooked out of my mind, I gave up staying asleep around 5 in the morning and made eggs and toast while I waited for my friend to get up so I could tell him about what happened the previous night. Pretty much as soon as he walked out of his room, I bombarded him with the story, and to my great disappointment, he really didn't take it that seriously. It's not that he didn't believe me, but he seemed to think it was an animal rather than some mountain man serial killer. I have to admit it was pretty hard to argue with his logic. Maybe I was just in my own head about it. At least that's what I thought until the next night. That day we both stayed indoors, mostly. The temperature was in the 40s and we were pretty much out of firewood, so being outside was more of a test of endurance than anything. I wanted to retrieve my flashlight, but I definitely wasn't going to trek up the hillside by myself. That afternoon we made tacos and shared a few shots of tequila. That was more than enough to calm my nerves, and as darkness came down on the sky we played cards and talked about how much it sucked that we didn't have Wi-Fi. Getting pretty late into the night, we looked at the collection of DVDs once again and decided to switch it up and watch something scary. There wasn't a huge selection of movies, but we landed on The Strangers. Not the best choice in hindsight. We were both scared out of our minds watching that movie in our cabin in the middle of nowhere. Pairing that with the experience I had the night before, my nerves were a wreck. I do enjoy being scared, but this was a little too much for me. That's why my friend's next suggestion gave me a sickening feeling in my stomach. Apparently, the movie had awoken some morbid curiosity in him, and he wanted to go explore that abandoned building I had found. My gut said absolutely not, but my want to have a cool story to tell when we got back pushed me forward. I agreed as long as it was daytime. I wasn't keen on getting lost in an abandoned building at night, nor did I want to hike at night. The next day, we got moving around midday and started our way up the trail. Knowing where I wanted to go this time, we took a couple shortcuts and saved about an hour getting to the top of the valley. I pointed out the building to my friend and we set off towards it. There was no path, but the trees were pretty sparse, so it wasn't difficult to navigate our way there. The building took a little longer to get to than we anticipated, and we realized that our perspective from the top of the hill made our judgment of distance a little off. As we got closer, we also realized it was much larger than anticipated. The building was 3 stories and very long. It extended several hundred feet in one direction. We made our way around to the front and saw that it had a driveway that looked as if it hadn't been used in many years. The concrete was cracked and uneven. As we walked towards the front entrance, we saw a dilapidated wooden sign. One of the legs had broken, and it was leaning to one side. The paint had mostly peeled off, so the name of the place was unknown, but one word stuck out and made my heart drop slightly: Asylum. I really didn't want to go inside, but I wasn't about to leave my friend to explore it alone. I mentioned the thing that had picked up my flashlight 2 nights before, but my friend still believed it was some sort of animal. The front door was locked, but one of the larger windows had been smashed in, and there was a rug laid across the bottom, preventing the shattered glass from cutting us. It was clear we weren't the first people to enter this place since it had been shut down. We knew we didn't have much sunlight left and only one flashlight between us, so we decided to take a quick look around and head back so we could at least be close to the cabin when it started to get dark. Like I said, The trail was very easy to follow, and having my friend with me gave me enough confidence to make it back as long as we made it back to the trail before sundown. Upon entering, we realized, despite the size of the building, it was very cramped. It was filled with winding corridors and sections blocked by locked doors. The first floor seemed to mostly be nurses' stations and record rooms, administrative type of stuff. We headed up the main stairway to the second floor. Looking up, we could see the stairs to the third floor looked pretty sketchy. Some were broken entirely, and others looked like they were on their last legs. Like one more step on them, and they'd break and send you falling down. The second floor wasn't in great shape either, but it wasn't nearly as bad. This seemed to be where most of the living quarters were. Lots of rooms were locked, but some of the open ones revealed depressing, barren rooms. The walls were covered with mildew and unknown fungus. The beds no longer had mattresses, and their rusty bed frames gave us an unsettling vibe. I was imagining the people who used to live here being forced to endure horrible treatment, treated like prisoners inside their own minds and by the world around them. We turned a corner and saw the prolonged hallway before us. This was the lengthier side of the building. The corridor seemed to stretch forever. We decided not to go all the way. We would just take a quick peek and then start heading back. This corridor was sectioned off by fire doors that separated the hallway into different sections. All the doors were open at this point, but we could see how they would have worked when the building was in operation. There were a few rooms, and then the fire doors, and then offices, and it kind of went back and forth like that for a few sections. We ended up going about halfway down just out of curiosity. We saw old offices left to rot and more disturbing rooms. There was even a pharmacy section that had been raided previously. My friend said he was ready to head back, but then we both took a look down the remaining corridor and saw something that caught our eye. It was a solitary confinement sign. We both looked at each other and knew we had to check it out. We made our way down quickly without looking into any more rooms, just kept our eyes focused on that sign. We reached the final section and noticed its difference from the others. The walls were blank, no old notices or corkboards to be found, just rusted metal walls. There were 4 chambers, but 3 doors were locked. The last one in the back left corner was open, and we decided to poke our heads in. I could tell that once the walls had padding covering them, but now they were covered in deteriorating foam. The old cushioning had turned a sickening dark yellow color and looked more like a fungus than anything, but it was hardly the walls that kept our attention. We stared at a pile of old newspapers and information packets that were built up on the floor in a heap. There was a corroded metal filing cabinet with its drawers open and filled with all manner of decaying things. A makeshift tapestry hung over all of it, clearly made with an old bedsheet. It was riddled with holes and looked to be seconds away from ripping under the tension placed on it by holding itself up. There was something eerily familiar about this setup. It took me a second, and then I realized it. It was a bedroom. The pile of papers was a bed, and the filing cabinet a kind of dresser. My heart started to thump while I imagined what kind of deranged lunatic would live in such a place. This stuff was way too old, though. There was no way anyone still lived here. That's what I thought, until I took a step closer and saw metal that was corroded or rusted. It was a shiny new black. It was my flashlight. Tucked away under a few papers, but I saw it. I reached down, picked it up, and pressed the button, and the light turned on. I could feel my heartbeat in my temples at this point. Someone had picked up my flashlight. It wasn't an animal after all. My friend recognized it at once and turned to me with wide eyes. We immediately turned to get out of there. We weren't alone on this mountain, and we did not want to find out who our company was. Just as we turned to leave, we heard a loud slam. We looked down the hallway and saw that the first fire door to the long corridor had shut. It was here. The person that took my flashlight was inside the asylum with us. We both just kind of froze there for a second, not knowing what to do. Then, simultaneously, we both took off in a sprint towards the closed doors. It was the same sort of instinct an animal has when trapped in a cage. Our minds were blank except for the thought of escape. Panting, I made it to the door first. Pushing as hard as I could, it wasn't budging. Closing the door seemed to have latched some kind of emergency lock, and it seemed like I was trapped. A few seconds later, though, my much larger friend came barreling straight into the door and the rusted hinges cracked, leaving the door askew. With our combined strength, we were able to push hard enough to completely break the hinges, and the door fell on the floor, freeing us. Scrambling to our feet, we looked left and bolted for the main stairway. My heartbeat was pounding in my head. We were about halfway to the staircase when a shape burst out from one of the empty bedrooms and clinged to my friend's shoulders, dragging him to the ground. The thing looked like a jumble of rags and dirt. It wasn't until I saw the long, yellow nails and thin hand they were attached to protruding from the mass of worn cloth that I realized it was a person. Without thinking, I kicked the thing in its ribs. My adrenaline must have given my kick some extra power behind it, because the creature was knocked off of my friend and crashed hard into the doorframe he had pounced from. The heap of rags let out an ear-splitting screech that made me shudder. Apparently, I had injured it with my kick. My friend got to his feet and pulled me by my arm towards the stairs. I attempted to look back to see if we were being pursued, and the being was just getting to his feet. A dark, wet spot had started to seep into the outer layers of cloth, and I knew it must have been cut on some piece of old metal. Bounding down the staircase, we made it to the broken window to leave. Our pursuer had just made it to the top of the stairs, and in its attempt to rush down them, toppled and crashed down several steps at a time. Upon landing, I saw that its face was uncovered. A scar-ridden, sunken-in face was under that pile of former clothes. Its eyes are looking into mine. Something was inhuman about them, like they were more animal than man. A white, wispy, unkempt bear was now showing. I was frozen staring, and once again, my friend had to tug at me to follow him through the window. As we ran away, we heard the cries of the man. I almost felt bad, but then we heard scurrying and realized we weren't free yet. He was still coming for us. Already out of breath, we wheezed as we made our way up the hill. We could hear the snapping of branches far behind us, and that gave us the stamina to keep going. It was very dark at this point. The small amount of light left in the sky was barely enough for us to see 5 feet in front of us. We would have to use the flashlights to make it all the way back. I didn't want to use the flashlight and give our position away, but I felt confident enough that even as exhausted as we were, we could still outrun the injured man pursuing us. Finally, we made it to the top of the hill. I took a quick look back, but it was too dark to see anything. I could still hear the old man climbing his way towards us, but I dared not use my light to see just how close he was. We quickly found the trail and started going down as fast as we could. My friend was completely winded, and I could tell he was struggling to keep going. We cut through a few shortcuts where we could, but with it being so dark, we only did this when we could clearly see the trail further down. After what felt like seconds, and also years, we made it back to the cabin. We practically collapsed through the door and laid on the floor for several minutes, heaving, trying to catch our breath. I got up and made sure the doors were locked, but I knew they would only be a temporary solution. The insane man would go through the windows to get to us if he had to. I knew he would. We gathered all our belongings and listened hard. I couldn't hear anyone directly outside, and we decided to make a break for it. Awkwardly sprinting to the car with luggage bouncing uncomfortably in our hands and on our backs, we made it. We shoved everything into the hatchback, and with my whole body shaking, I opened the door and got inside. As fast as I could, I slammed the door shut. It felt like I had just disarmed a bomb with 1 second left on the timer. My friend started the car and began to back out of the driveway. Out of nowhere, something slammed hard into the side of the car. A very old and very unhinged face was glaring at me through my window. The reflected light from the headlights illuminated his horrific face. It was covered in old scar tissue, which made it disfigured and off-putting. I was frozen in fear, staring back at it. The fury and hatred in his face gave me a sickening feeling. We finished backing out of the driveway, and the dirt road was smooth enough for us to go at least faster than he could run. After a little over a mile of driving, we made it to a paved road that led to the highway. Air finally returned to my lungs and my chest unclenched. Somehow, we made it. Safe on the open road, we began our trip back home. We drove all through the night. It probably took us an extra 2 hours to get down the mountain with how careful we were to look out for turns. But we knew it was better to be careful then, go off the curb and be stuck. If we were stuck, he could catch up to us. After a nail-biting stop at a gas station, we made it to dawn. My friend and I didn't talk too much about what happened. We exchanged a few words about how unbelievable the events that just took place were and how terrified we felt. I did call the police and they searched the area around the cabin and said there was no sign of anyone in the area. I have no idea if they ever investigated the asylum or not. I don't really care, to be honest. I was just happy I did it with my life. Needless to say, I will never be returning to that place nor Arkansas at all if I can help it. It was the scariest experience of my life. I still have nightmares sometimes about the old man who lived in the asylum. Who was he? Some old resident who had lost his mind and decided to live there even after it was shut down, is my best guess. I really don't know. I do know that every time I go hiking now, I stay on the path and keep an ear out for anyone approaching, just in case he's still trying to catch up to me. Thank you for dropping by the archives and listening to our ghastly stories. Don't forget to like, comment, and lastly subscribe. Until next time, archivists, I bid you all good night.